Okay, and we're going to talk about, there's noise. It's what you talk about in your book, the signal and the noise. We live in an era where there's more noise than there's ever been before.
Right.
And noise is a distraction. And obviously, what you talk about in the book is that nothing helps more than data. The more data you can have, often, the better your prediction will be. The problem is we live in an era where there's tons of data. You just can't discern what's reliable, what's not reliable.
That's right. So if you have more data, it should make your life easier. It's more information about a problem, and so you can make a better decision. But people can have information overload sometimes where they don't know how to process this information. They haven't really trained themselves to do that. Or worse, if you have 400 different cable channels, then you have a lot of choices for how you consume your information, right?
Yep.
As we were talking about before, a lot of those choices are not really giving you the most accurate picture that they can, but giving you a particular set of information that may mislead you, right? If you really were
based
watching,
on who they think is watching, probably
based on who they think is watching. If you really were watching Fox News every day during the campaign or going to the Drudge Report, say, right, then you would see plenty of polls showing Romney ahead or tied, whatever else, because they
surging.
Yeah, because they would cherry pick the 3 polls out of 30 or 40 that would come out that day and highlight those 3, right? So if you were really in that bubble where you're not doing, I'm someone who I do go ahead and I watch Fox News and MSNBC, and I read conservative blogs and liberal blogs. It's important, I think, to do that, but people, it's so easy now just to kind of stay in your own little bubble and never venture outside of it, and it seems like people are doing that more and more nowadays.
Well, I call that preaching to the choir. That's what I think most entertainment, most media is these days, is that you can have a satellite channel with 85 or 150 different channels on it, and you can just listen to the music that you're comfortable with. You're never confronted with anything that you're not comfortable with. You can choose to watch the news that you're comfortable with. You
That's
can
right.
choose to hear the opinions that you're comfortable with. So what I think is that nobody's changing anybody's minds. Everybody's talking to the people that agree with them, and no one's stepping outside of their little cubicle.
So, and there are various ways to measure partisanship. You can, for example, look at how often Democrats and Republicans agree on anything in the Congress. And it's becoming, I mean, there's been less and less partisan agreement since about 1970 or 1980, and that coincides with the rise of cable television. It might just be a coincidence, but I think it's where people no longer have to actually go and have a civil debate and iron out their differences. They can just kind of retreat to their corners a lot more. I think it's pretty dangerous for the democracy, frankly.
Well, I think about, say, 1968, or I think it's 68, Tet Offensive, and Walter Cronkite goes on the news, and he pretty much looks into the camera and says, "I no longer believe that this war is winnable." And it was a shocking moment, and Lyndon Johnson saw that and said, "We just lost Walter Cronkite. This is debacle." Wouldn't happen anymore, because Walter Cronkite was talking to liberals and conservatives, you know, and he was talking to America. I don't think anybody's talking to America anymore. Now there'd be Walter Cronkite's people would probably know Walter Cronkite's opinion and be comfortable with it, but nobody who's uncomfortable with Walter Cronkite's opinion is going to be even watching him or caring what he thinks.
Yeah, if people say, I mean, this is the other unfortunate thing, right, where if you say something that people don't like, they assume you're on the other team, right? They assume that you're some partisan hack, right? And I think, look, I think journalists have political views and ought to have political views. If you're covering a field and you don't have some opinions about it, it's a little odd, I think.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of sociopathic if you have no feelings whatsoever about the field that you're studying. But at the same time, I think it is possible to be to try and be an honest broker, at least, right? And just say, look, I'm delivering the data to you the best I can, and you know, willing to back it up with showing your work and defending your case. And that's what they do at Harvard Business School, for example, right? Is it's all about, they'll give you some hypothetical or sometimes some real business to study, right? And you say, well, here's what I do. And the professor doesn't care about that part as much as the next part, which is when he says, well, defend your ideas, right? Here are 5 critiques I came up with of your ideas, defend them. And we don't get to that level of depth very often, certainly not with the kind of skimming the surface cable news punditry, right? Where people say a lot of things that aren't really very defensible if they had to be a little bit deeper, and they hope that no one kind of calls them on wanting to read the fine print. And I'm more of a detail-oriented guy. I think sometimes it's so easy to get different snippets of information now that we forget that you lose something when you make an approximation or an abstraction. You know, it's not as good as fleshing things out at greater length, I think.